Welcome to today's webinar, Immunophenotyping in FCS Express 6 Flow Cytometry. My name's Kaya Ghosh. I'm a Technical Application Specialist at Novo Software, and I want to thank you all for attending. Today we're going to do an example immunophenotyping webinar, an example immunophenotyping workflow, excuse me. And it's going to be rather brief, just to give you an idea of the software functions that you will need in order to perform a typical immunophenotyping experiment. Okay, so what we're going to cover today is we're going to start out from a blank layout, and we're going to be starting out by inserting and formatting plots. Then we're going to create and apply gates, markers, and quadrants. We'll add statistics to our layout using the default statistics tables, spreadsheets, and text tables. And we'll also add more tubes to our experiment and analyze them side by side using panels. And I thought that that would be a very useful thing to put into today's webinar, because usually when you're doing an immunophenotyping experiment, you might have multiple tubes per subject. So whether your subject is a human or a mouse or even cell lines in a test tube, you might have different staining tubes for each one of those subjects. And so you need to relate those together for each mouse or human or cell line or whatever it is. And so panels is a very useful feature for that. Okay, and finally, we'll batch process our results to PowerPoint and Excel. So before we actually get started, I wanted to show you a really nice example layout. And this is far more complex than what we're going to build today. But I just wanted to show it to you because it's an example of what you can achieve with FCS Express. Okay, so this is an experiment where it's an immunophenotyping experiment. And if you take a look at the data list here, and don't worry about what that tool is, I'm going to show you how to get to that. The data list shows that we're analyzing 6 tubes for this one patient. This is actually a clinical layout, so it happens to be human samples. And it has a B-cell tube, well, 2 B-cell tubes, an isotype control tube, a myeloid tube, a TNK tube, and a specimen tube. Okay, so we're analyzing all those side by side, and this layout's actually quite complex. So we have at the bottom here, you can see that there's 12 different pages. We're right now looking at the summary statistics page. It's got all these nice text tables in it that have statistics in them from the plots. You can probably see some of the statistics changing when I move the lymph gate. Okay, so I'm not sure how large your screens are, but if you look at the numbers there in the text table, they're updating live when I move that gate. Okay, and we have a whole bunch of other pages. So for instance, here's a page for the B-cell tube. Here's a page for our myeloid markers. Okay, and the thing to keep in mind is, the thing to keep in mind is this is very flexible. So FCS Express doesn't require that you have a one-to-one correlation between the number of tubes and the number of pages in your layout. You can see we only have 6 tubes in our layout here, but we have 12 pages in our layout. And you can put plots from any tube on any page, just mix and match. So for instance, you know, I can grab the specimen tube and put it on this page here. Okay, and I can also come over to a completely different page and put the specimen tube here. Okay, so it's on completely different tubes. We can even do like a 2-page view and see the different pages together. And there's a whole lot of tools you can use in your layout. So if your immunophenotyping layout gets very complicated and you're having trouble finding where all your tubes are, where the different files are, you can use these handy navigators. And I'm just showing you this to kind of drive the point home that your layout design is very, very flexible. So for instance, I can come to my specimen look at my data navigator and look at the specimen FCS item here in the data navigator. And this is giving me a thumbnail image of all the plots in my layout that are showing that particular FCS file. So, and then you can click on one and FCS Express will take you right to it. Okay? So there's one specimen tube, here's the other one we put. It's highlighting it down here in the lower right corner, okay? And then we also have these handy gate navigators as well. So the gate navigators, again, if you mouse over any of these items, it's going to show you all the plots in your layout that are gated on that particular gate. So I can click on any one of these myeloid plots, and it's going to take me directly to where it is, okay? So that should be pretty handy. All right, so there we go. So it's showing me a CD19 plot. Okay, and again, lastly, we have a layout navigator, which is going to show you all the different items on a page-by-page basis. So this first entry here in the layout navigator is my statistics page. So I can click on any item in there. For instance, I have a number of text boxes in there, so let's just click on this one, and it's showing me this text box down here. Or I can click on, the gate view. It's showing me the gate view. Okay, so this is sort of like a table of contents for your entire layout. Okay, so this is a really nice example of how fancy and how comprehensive your immunophenotyping report can look in FCS Express, tying multiple tubes together. And I don't have this set up as a batch, but you could even batch through different iterations of the 6 tubes. So if you're analyzing data from 50 patients at once, and every patient had 6 tubes, then you would have 300 tubes in your data list, and you would be able to batch through them on a 6-by-6 basis. Okay, so we're going to build something much, much simpler today. We're just going to analyze a 3-tube experiment from mice, and it's going to we'll probably just build it as one page so that all the plots are on the page at the same time and we can see them together in the webinar at any point. But, just keep in mind that flexibility. So even though I'm going to build it very simple, I could have built it very complex and kept everything on, different pages. I could have had like a 200-page layout with, tons and tons of markers, however many staining parameters I had. But we're just going to keep it simple because the purpose of today is to really just show you the software features that you need to use in order to build a layout that is complex. Okay? So, again, before I actually get started with the new page, I know we've had a few people kind of pop in a couple of minutes late. Please note the GoToMeeting control panel. I've got a snapshot of it here in the upper right. And if you can enter in any questions that come up as we go, where it says enter a question for staff, just type that in and I'll try to answer it in the course of my workflow, or my colleague on the line will answer it through the chat window, and we'll follow up with you offline as well if necessary. Okay, so let's get started. Coming back to the outline. We're going to start out with a new layout, and let's just do these really simple things first. We're going to insert some plots, and we're going to create gates, markers, and quadrants. Okay, that's pretty straightforward. So let's do that together, and we're going to work through it not too slow and not too quick. We have a lot of ground to cover, so we'll try to find a good pace. Okay, so here's our new layout, and I'm going to put in a plot. So I think I'll come up to my Insert tab, and we'll put in a density plot to start off with. Okay, and let's put in our T-cell tube first. Okay, now before I get into more detail, let's just open up our data list here. So once you put in a plot on your layout, your data list is going to automatically have all the other tubes, all the other FCS files rather, from that directory folder loaded into the data list. Okay, so right now we're looking at the T-cell tube from mouse 1, but the experiment that we're going to analyze today, and I apologize I can't make this font size bigger, But basically, this is a 3-tube experiment, like I mentioned, and the whole folder contains data from 3 mice. So I don't know if you can see, we have a T cell tube from mouse 1, a T cell tube from mouse 2, I'm highlighting it as I go, and a T cell tube from mouse 3. And then we also have 2 other tubes from each mouse. So we've got a B cell tube from each mouse, which I'm highlighting all 3 of them there. And here are the NK cell tubes from each mouse. So the logic we're going to use to organize this layout is we're just going to build a layout with the data from mouse 1 to start off with. And then at the end, we'll batch through all the data from the entire experiment, which is a total of 3 mice. Okay, so why don't I keep that on the side? We'll just keep that in the back of our mind as we go. So let's change the parameters here. And again, we do have a getting started layout that kind of teaches you very, very basic actions like how to change parameters, how to add gates. I'm not going to really narrate that excessively. I'm just going to kind of go, but it's pretty intuitive. You just click on the axes and go. Okay, so we're looking at our CD45 versus SSC. And you know what? I think I'm going to just really quickly change my preferences so that I just only have the stain on the axes, because I think that will be a little bit shorter. Okay, so all right, so let's actually gate out these beads as well. We don't need those. So I'm going to draw an exclusion gate on the beads here. These are some beads right here in the upper right corner of my plot. Okay, and we'll call this beads. And I'm going to choose to exclude them. We don't really need those for our analysis, but as you know, those can be useful if you're trying to calculate concentrations. Okay, so I made it an exclusion gate, and I'm going to gate this plot on that exclusion gate so that now we don't have the beads. And I'll probably just get rid of that gate showing on the layout because it's a little distracting. All right, so let's draw a couple of gates. I'm going to draw a gate around my lymphs. And you know, this sample doesn't really have a very visible blasts population, so I think, you know what, we will just start out by looking at one of these other tubes. Let's see. I guess this one has a little more. Maybe we can use this one. So this is where the blasts would be. If we had some blasts, we don't have a lot. Let's just draw a gate for our blasts, though. Okay. Okay, so since this is our T cell tube, let's start out by looking at our T cells. So I'm going to start out by looking at my lymphs, and simply by dragging the lymphs gate out, I've made a new plot gated on lymphs. Okay, some of you who are starting out, by the way, you might have default preferences in place. I've set my preferences to have the current gate showing in the plot title. That's something that you can also do by going to your preferences, or you can add it at any time to any plot on a per plot basis. Okay, so if you have questions about that, just feel free to let us know. But I'm just pointing that out because it might be a little bit different from the preferences you have set up. So let's change these axes to forward scatter and CD3. And we'll draw a gate around our T cells here. Okay, and so these are, you know, of course, live updating gates. You see I move my lymphs gate around, and this T cells plot is like updating in real time. It's actually going very, very fast on my side. You might have a little bit of lag because we are using GoToMeeting, and it depends on everyone's internet connection. But I think if you try this out, FCS Express 6 is very, very fast. So you'll see that it's really nice replacing your gates. Okay, and let's go one step further with this immunophenotyping routine. We want to look at the T cells data, the T cells population in more detail. So I'll drag that out. Okay, and let's look at our CD4 versus CD8. Okay, and you know what? It's nice to look at these density plots and contour plots. You know, when you're drawing, when you need to draw gates on a plot that has a lot of cells and it's hard to see the boundaries. But sometimes once you get deeper into your analysis, it's nicer to see the backgating information. So I'm going to change both of these into a color dot plot. And all I did was just highlight both of the plots. You can do it any way you would, like you would in PowerPoint. You can drag your cursor around to select both of them. You can do a control click or a command click if you're on a Mac. And we're going to change these plot types here to color dot from the Format tab. Okay, so I'm going to draw a couple of gates, or you know what, I think in this case, let's add some quads. This is a really nice looking population breakdown. I think quadrants will delineate these just fine. So we'll put in our quadrants. You can do that from the gating tab, or you can just right click and do show quadrants. Okay, and let me show you how you can format those quadrants, because a lot of times in an immunophenotyping experiment, these rectilinear quadrants are not sufficient. It happens to be for this experiment, but I will just show you anyway. You can format them by coming up to your right-click format on the plot and coming down to quads, and we'll change these to floating. Okay, and then you can adjust each vertex individually to fit your population. Okay, just coming back into there, the formatting, quads, you also have the option of percentile, X, Y, or both. That's useful for if you have controls and you want to set the quads to be a certain given percentile and you want that to update for every single data set. Okay, all your other formatting options are here as well too. So remember I mentioned that I've set up my plot titles to have the gate name in the plot title automatically. You can set that up via your preferences, and that will be the case globally for all your layouts that you build going forward from that point. Or you can do it on a one-by-one basis just by right-clicking on the plot and using this drop-down menu to add in the current gate. Okay, but all sorts of things are here. So you can change your title font, you know, whatever you want to do. So if I want to make it Times New Roman, maybe change the color. And then this nice preview option down here, you can look at that before accepting the change. Okay, you can get rid of the background border. You can change your axes. I'm not going to actually do that because I want to leave it on by exponential, but all of the changes that you might want to do for your own experiment, they're here in the right-click format for that plot. Okay, and you can even affect the change on multiple plots simultaneously. For instance, I can select both of these plots, and in that case, you would come up to the Format tab rather than right-click Format and change whatever it is that you want to change. So for instance, maybe I want to add a legend here to both of these plots. Okay, and there it is. I'm going to undo that though. I don't actually need the legend. All right. Are there any questions so far? Please feel free to enter those in. Okay. So let's put in some statistics. We're going to continue to build our layout with the data from the other tubes, but this is kind of a nice little semi-complete or complete analysis for the T cells in terms of the abbreviated analysis we're doing today. So let's show you how you can quickly add some statistics. You can right-click on a plot and come over to statistics from the pop-up menu and put in your gate statistics. Okay. You can also right-click on that window itself and take away or add in any of these different items. So maybe I'll take out the X geometric mean and I'll put in the XBD RSD, for instance. Okay, you can do the same thing with these quadrant layouts, sorry, these quadrant plots. Okay, and then in that case, you're going to get the statistics breakdown for every single quad. Okay, so I'm going to delete that. I'm just trying to save a little space on my layout because I am going to just build, I'm going to try and build my entire layout here on one page, just so it's easy to kind of see everything at the same time for the purposes of the webinar. Okay, so in interest of that, I think I'm going to resize these plots so that I have a little more room for the other plots. Okay, so you see that resizing works in tandem, just like it would in PowerPoint. You can resize multiple objects at the same time. Okay, so let's continue on. Since we're looking at the mouse 2 at the moment, let's just continue building our layout based on that mouse 2. Okay, so we're going to take our B-cell tube and drag this over down here from the data list. That's another way to insert plots, is just dragging the file from the data list. Okay, so I think color dot is fine. And let's look at, again, our CD45 versus side scatter. And once you've put in gates in the layout, whenever you're looking at a plot with the same parameters, you can right click and do show gates, and I can show all the gates that I've already drawn on that particular pair of parameters. So let's just add in our lymphs and our blasts. Okay, and I don't know if you can see, but these gates don't actually fit this population that well. Okay, so what you can do, and this is a new feature in FCS Express 6, is use data-specific gates. And data-specific gates, I'll outline them up here because they're a really useful feature. They will allow you to change the gating position for a given gate and make it specific for that particular data file. Okay, so let's make this lymphs gate better fit this B-cells tube. So I'm going to click on data-specific gate. First I'm going to highlight the gate and then click on data-specific gate, and I'm going to resize this, maybe readjust the vertices individually so that it actually fits that population a little better. Okay, so we can even put that gate text box back in as well. Okay, same thing with the blasts. I can make that data specific as well. So we have a question about how do you have the gate names and frequencies show there as well. Whenever you're showing the gate on a new plot, you're right, it doesn't show up by default, although you can set that in your preference to be the case. But let me just show that real quick, how you do it on a per plot basis. So when you first put in the gate, it's going to look like that. Then you can right click and just come to this pop-up menu and do recreate gate text boxes. Okay, so pretty much whenever you're trying to change something about a plot, the answer is going to be there in that right click menu. This pop-up menu is going to have most likely whatever you're looking for. Okay, so just feel free to use that data-specific gate. That's really useful when you're building an immunophenotyping layout and you have populations moving around from sample to sample or from subject to subject. Okay, so let's take a look at our B cells in the lymphs population. Again, I'm just going to grab my lymphs gate out, and let's move this up here maybe. I'm going to make these the same size as well. These align tools are really useful for that. So I know I'm showing you a lot of things, and it's kind of on purpose. This layout is a very typical layout that is similar to one you might be building in a lot of cases. So you're going to need to use many different tools in FCS Express. I'm just sort of trying to cover a lot of various things. Okay, so let's take a look at our CD3 cells. Sorry, our CD3 versus CD19. Okay, so we can now draw a gate around our CD19 positive cells. We don't really have a lot in this particular sample. Let's take a look. Some of the other tubes do have more, so maybe it's better if we draw the gate on this mouse one. because that way it's just easier to see. So we'll put our gate here, and we'll call it B cells. Okay, and again, we could put in our statistics just like we did above. Okay, so now we've built a layout with 2 of the 3 tubes from our analysis. Remember that data navigator I mentioned to you before? So if you come to the View tab and look at Data Navigator, you can kind of keep track of the work you've done so far. So it's telling me that the layout is showing my tubes from the T cell and the B cell. We still need to put in some plots from our NK cell tube. All right, so let's do that together. So I'm going to grab my NK cell tube from mouse 1. We're looking at mouse 1 right now together. And I'll drag that down here. Okay, this time I think I'm going to just look at a histogram. So remember, you can change the plot type at any time by highlighting the plot and coming up to the Format tab and using that Change Plot Type. Okay, so this time let's change the parameter we're looking at as CD1656. So when you insert a plot from the data list, it's ungated. So again, we are going to need to gate this on lymphs. There's a couple different ways to apply gates. One of the easiest ways is to just grab a lymphs gate from any plot and drag it onto that plot. Okay, let me undo that. Another way is to come up to your gating tab and use this current gate drop-down menu. And while that plot's highlighted, I can gate it on lymphs. So you can see that the histogram changed to be gated on lymphs. Okay, let's undo that one more time. I'm going to show you yet another way to do it. And that's by using this gate view, or gate navigator, for those of you who are familiar with the gate navigator. So this gate view or gate navigator, whatever you want to use, the gate navigator is available from the View tab right here. It's going to be an interactive legend of your gates. And so here you can do lots of things. You can actually even change the titles of your gates. So for instance, maybe I'll double click on lymphs and change it to lymphocytes. Okay, so now you see it's actually changed on all the plots as well. Okay, but you can also use this gate view to apply gates. So I'll drag my lymphocytes gate onto the plot, and now it's gated on lymphocytes. Okay, are there any questions about creating or applying gates so far? So that's all up here on the gating tab, except for the gate view is here on the Insert tab. Okay, and the gate navigator is here on the View tab. But all of your typical gating tools for creating gates and even applying gates, you can use this drop-down menu. That's all there on the gating tab. You can also right-click on a plot and create gates from there if you prefer. Okay. All right, so let's create a marker. So I can do that from the gating tab as well. So I'm going to put a marker on this plot. All right, and now I'm looking, that marker is obviously highlighting the positive population here. Let's create a linked marker, because that's something that can be kind of useful for all of you as well. So for instance, maybe I want to take a look at this T cells population. I'll drag it over here. And let's change this to the same parameter as our histogram. So we're going to put it on a CD1656, and we'll create a marker here as well. So, right now these markers are behaving independently. They're completely different markers, okay? But you can actually link markers to each other, and that's new in version 6 as well. And it's easily done by dragging and dropping. So I can drag, if I take this plot as the standard, or the reference plot for the marker, I can grab this left-hand vertex, drag it onto the endpoint of this plot up here, and then take my right-hand endpoint and drag it onto the endpoint of the M1 on this upper plot. Okay, and now I can't even move this marker left and right. See, it won't let me do it. It's just letting me move it up and down visually on the plot, but since these endpoints are linked to the endpoints down here, whenever I move the endpoints on this original marker down here, you see that the marker up there is updating. Okay, so that is also going to be useful. I mean, you can think of many situations when that's going to be useful. Maybe you have isotype controls or positive controls, some kind of control that you want to relate to other plots in your layout. Linking markers might be something you want to try out there as well. Okay, so talking of histograms is never complete if we don't talk about histogram overlays. So I'm going to show you how to create a histogram overlay. Okay, so why don't we do that like this? We're going to create an overlay on this NK cells mouse 1 histogram. Right now we're looking at lymphs. We're going to create an overlay with blasts. So let's drag that same file from the data list. We're going to just do an overlay with the same file, but just 2 different gates. So I'm going to grab that same file, drag it onto my plot, and say, add it as a new overlay. Okay, so that's important. This is pretty plain text, so you should be able to understand it when you're doing it, but just make sure you choose that second radio button if you're actually trying to create an overlay. Okay, so now I have 2 overlays, and they're both identical. So we want to change it so that the second overlay is actually reflecting the blasts population instead. So we can do that by, again, coming to our right-click format. And if I come to my overlays option, overlays is sort of a catch-all for a lot of different characteristics of each individual overlay. So you see that the first one here is gated on lymphocytes. Okay, but the second one is also gated on lymphocytes, which doesn't make sense. So we're going to change that one to blasts. And now when I click preview, you can see that we have 2 different populations showing up on our plot. We can even add in a legend. Okay, and I'm going to put this legend on the bottom, and you see let's see why that didn't quite show up yet. I think maybe the file name's a little long. So, so let's just put the legend on the right for now. Okay. So when you do that, you might need to just make your plot a little wider so it fits. But let's change the text in the legend as well. So right now, the text of the legend is just showing the file name, which is not that informative. We want to show the gate in the legend instead. So we'll come to our overlays, and we're going to select both of our overlays and change this to this text here is going to allow us to show the gate formula, or the gate name rather. And this text, I know that's hard for you to remember. If you look in our manual under the overlays category, it'll remind you of what you need to type in here. So when I click preview, now this is showing up as the gate name in the legend. Okay? So there's a whole lot of other things you can do from the overlay. You can change like the fill. So right now I am filling the histograms. I could not fill the histograms, for instance. And see now they're empty. I'm going to put my fill back in because I like it. You can change the degree of transparency. So right now I have a lot of transparency. I could change it to a little bit less. And you see that effectively it gets darker. It becomes less see-through each overlay. Okay, line options, everything you want to do. Everything you want to do is here in the right-click format, and especially overlays for every single histogram overlay you might have. Are there any questions so far? I'm going to do a quick save just to be on the safe side. Okay, so far we've put in some plots and gates. We've applied plots and gates and markers and quads. We've put in some default stats. I'm also going to show you a really cool new tool in FCS Express 6, which is useful for getting statistics from your layout that are a little bit more custom-made or informative. Okay, so for instance, let's say we want to get a CD4-CD8 ratio. How would we do that? So right now you might be only doing that in Excel or even with a handheld calculator and jotting it down somewhere or typing it into your report manually. But in FCS Express you can easily do that very, very nicely using spreadsheets. Okay, and those are just like what they sound like. They're sort of like a mini Excel spreadsheet. You can think of them that way. A little mini Excel spreadsheet that resides inside of FCS Express. So let's put in a spreadsheet and we'll use that to make that CD4-CD8 ratio. I'm going to come up to my Insert tab and click on New Spreadsheet. Okay, and let's drag this over here just so it's not blocking anything. Okay, and let me type in a couple of manual column headers here. So this is going to be CD4 events and CD8 events. And, whoops, looks like I didn't quite type that in. And then this is going to be our 4:8 ratio. So let's drag in the CD8. We're basically going to put in the number of CD8 events and, the number of CD4 events, and we're going to divide one column by another, just like we would in Excel. And we're going to do that by dragging in the actual statistic from the plot. So let's drag this plot down and just say OK. And so we want to do the quadrant that corresponds to the CD8 positive cells. So looking at the plot, that is the upper left quad. And I'm going to put a number of events. And let's drag this down again into this cell. And we're going to say, this time we want the lower right quad. That corresponds to the CD4. And we're going to choose percent of gated cells again. Oh, I'm sorry. I meant to choose the number of events. So when you're creating a ratio like that, you generally want to divide raw numbers by raw numbers rather than percentages. So we'll do lower right and number of events. Okay, and so this part's just like Excel. You're all familiar with that. When you want to divide or create any kind of formula, type an equal sign first, and then you can click on the cell, type your operator, which is in this case a division sign, click on the second cell, and I hit return. Okay, and you see now that's showing my ratio. And that is, of course, like everything else in FCS Express, it's going to live update as you move that quad around. Okay, even as I change my data file. So if I come up to my data tab, go to the next data file, you see that updates as well. Okay, are there any questions about that? Okay, great. So let me show you one other cool thing. The way to move the quadrants, there was one question coming in. You can just hover your mouse over any one of the individual vertices, and then you'll be able to move that vertex. Okay, so that is spreadsheets. Let me show you one more way that you can organize your statistics. So do you remember the layout that I showed you at the beginning had these really, really nice looking text tables that are like summarizing statistics from all over your layout. So in this case, it's a complicated layout with 12 pages, and the stats in these tables are culling statistics from throughout that entire layout. So we can do the same thing here, even though this is a much simpler layout. Let's just build a really abbreviated version of one of those text tables. And the advantage there is, you know, these default stat tables, they're really nice for summarizing an individual plot, but when you want to pull in statistics from various plots and pull them into one table, you really need to make one of those custom stat tables, okay? Or you can use a spreadsheet. But the custom stat tables are nice, or custom text tables rather are nice because you can add all sorts of formatting elements and make your report look very professional. And that's useful if you're going to be making a template that you're using over and over and over again. Even if it's for internal use, why not make it look nice? You know, why not highlight the columns and just make it more readable? So let's put in a text table. That's the same way you would do it in PowerPoint. So you can come up to the Insert tab, put in a text box, and then we're going to right-click and just put in a table from that pop-up menu. Okay, again, so I'm doing things a little fast, but just keep in mind everything is all just right-clicking and pop-up menus and drag and drop. It's very easy to use. So let's put in maybe 3 columns and 3 rows. I'll give my table a title. So this is fully formattable, of course. I can merge these cells. I can center align using the text tab here. I can change the font size, maybe make it bold, change the font to, you know, a different kind of font. Okay, so let's put in, for instance, maybe our B cells percentage. So I can drag that directly from a plot. I'll just drag that gate down into that cell and put in the percent of gated cells. Okay, the software already knows that I wanted the B cell stat because that's what I dragged. I dragged the B cells gates. So there that is. Okay, you can also drag from these different from these stat tables as well. So if I want to put in like my, let's say our CD8 geo mean, I can find that column here. CD8 is upper left, so I'll grab my Y geometric mean and put that in there. And maybe I want to put in my 4:8 ratio, CD4, CD8 ratio. Okay, so, whoops, looks like I have an extra column there. In any case, we can put in that ratio here by right-clicking and putting in the token. In this case, it's going to be a spreadsheet cell value, and we want to put in that cell, which is D2. Okay, so we will put in our cell address D2. Okay, and there it is. And then you can format this. Just, we're not going to make it as fancy as that layout that we looked at the beginning. Okay, we're not going to go totally crazy, but I just wanted to show you where those options are. So, for instance, you can highlight this cell, for instance, like this, and come into your table properties, and we'll give this a nice fill color of maybe a light blue. Okay, and then you could even do sunken and raised borders. Maybe I'll highlight the entire table now. It's just one thing that kind of makes everything look a lot more professional. So we'll maybe give the table border a raised look and the cell borders sunken. Okay, so that looks nice, right? Probably if I zoom in, you can see a little bit better. Okay, so feel free to experiment with that. That's a nice way to summarize your results from all over your layout. And again, this is a simple layout with just one page, but you can drag and drop gates, plots, quadrants, markers. I'm sorry, not quadrants directly. You'll have to drag the plot and select the quadrant, but you can get all those stats into here by drag and drop from different pages. Okay, so let us know if you have any questions. That's correct. So you cannot drag a cell directly from the spreadsheet to the text box. You'll have to do the right-click insert token and do this spreadsheet value right here. Thanks for your question. Okay, so I think our layout looks pretty nice and complete. We have plots from all 3 of our tubes. Okay, so we have plots from our T cell tube, our B cell tube, our NK cell tube. We've got a few different stats in here. We've got all the gates we need. We're pretty much ready to create a batch process. But before we do that, we need to use the panels feature. So remember, when you're doing a multi-tube experiment and you want to batch through those tubes on, let's say, a 3x3 basis, like we're going to do together with this layout, it's really best to use the panels feature, because that way it's the layout will know to go through your tubes in terms of in the 3x3 logic during the batch. Okay, so so basically, to explain that a little bit further, by default the batching logic is just going to go from iteration to iteration, which in this case, since we haven't made it a panel yet, each iteration is 1 tube. But we want to change each iteration to be 3 tubes, okay, because we have a B cell tube, an NK cell tube, and a T cell tube from each mouse. That's a total of 3 tubes. So let's use the panels feature to do that. So there's a couple of different places you can get panels. You can get it from up here on the data tab. It's near the data list, so that's easy to find. Or you can get it down here at the bottom where it says no panel is active. Okay, either way, doesn't matter. So let's add in our panel. So click add, you can give it some kind of a name. I'm just going to call this my mouse experiment number 1. Tell it the number of tubes. And here I would advise giving each of your tubes a name. It's not mandatory, but it's going to help you keep everything in the same order so you don't get transpositional errors. Okay, so why don't we just call it B, NK, T, and just say OK. So take a look at my data list here. Does everything look correct? Hopefully you're saying no, because it's assigning everything in alphanumerical order. So when you load in your data files into the data list, everything comes in alphanumerical order. So we're just going from B to NK to T. But we need to rearrange these tubes so that they correspond, so that the files correspond to the tube names, and that we're arranging them in groups of 3 tubes for each mouse. Okay, so we want the top iteration to be mouse 1, second to be mouse 2, and so on. So it's best to just reorder them manually, unless you have keywords you could sort on. Then you could actually sort them the same way you sort columns in Excel. But let's just keep it simple today. We're just going to manually sort them. So I'm going to find my mouse 1, and you can use these little buttons up here at the top. So these up and down kind of caret arrows, those are useful for what we're going to do here. So let's move that up, and I'll find my my T cell tube and move that up. Okay, same thing with these guys. Let's move the NK up and the T up. So you see why it's really useful to name your tubes, because you can catch any errors that you're making with the order. Okay, so does this look good? BNKT, BNKT, yes. Okay, so we're looking at mouse 1, then mouse 2, then mouse 3. All right, so before we actually run the batch, let's just you know what, let's make sure that we're looking at mouse 1 at the same time. So looks like things got a little messed up, and so that's why I would suggest, actually, when you're building your panel, if you want to be really safe, just keep the tubes from one particular mouse in there at the same time, and that way you won't run into an issue. But let's just manually fix this so we're looking at mouse 1 on all of the plots. So the top one, we want to look at our T cell tubes. So I'll just double click this, and we're going to change the overlay on all of the objects, on the selected objects to that file. So we'll say OK. So those are T cells, mouse 1. And then these ones are my B cell tube. So we'll do that. And then these ones are my NK cell tube. OK, so that is good. That's looking fixed. If you have any questions, just feel free to enter that in. We also have a short video about working with panels It's just 2 or 3 minutes long, and it'll kind of show you how to do this in a much quicker way. So before we run the batch, before we set it up, we can just kind of preview our samples by clicking Next Previous. Okay, so now you see we're looking at both of our sets of samples here. So, okay. So let's set up our batch. It looks like I'm missing a few tubes here, so we'll just look at a few. We'll look at mouse 1 and mouse 2 together. Whoops. Okay, so let's put in our batch process. We're going to come over here to Batch Actions, and these are floating windows, so I can kind of tuck it in here in the data list so it stays out of the way. Okay, and let's put in an export to Excel, and we'll put that on my desktop so it's easy to find. And now we'll just drag over the stats we want to look at. So perhaps we want to drag over a couple of stats from the stats window. So I'll drag maybe these. I can select multiple ones at once. Okay. You can also drag gates or markers over directly. So maybe I want to put in my blasts percentage. I'll drag that over and do percent of gated cells. And then you can drag the results from this entire table right here that we made. So I'll just drag the whole border of the table. Okay, and we're going to have basically this many columns in our export. Okay, so now let's put in a PowerPoint. We could do a PowerPoint and a PDF. Just to keep things short, I'm just going to do a PowerPoint because they're both visual exports and setting them up is identical. So let's click on Save to PowerPoint. And we'll open it automatically so I don't have to hunt it down. And we'll come down here. I know this is a large window. The only thing you need to pay attention to typically is down here, setting up your file name and your file path. So again, I'm going to put that on my desktop. Okay. So we're pretty much ready to go. We are going to just click Run, and it's going to batch through our available tubes. So let's click Run here on the Batch tab. And there's many different things you can do with the batch. You can actually adjust the gates for each iteration, but we're just going to just kind of power through here. So let's look at the Excel first. Okay, so you have one row of data for every iteration and one column for every stat that you chose to export. So we've got data from our CD8 cells, our CD8 gate rather, data from our B cells. Here's that statistic we put in our spreadsheet, which is our CD4-CD8 ratio. Okay. And we can look at our PowerPoint, which is popped up on my other screen. And we basically batched through 2 mice here. I apologize, I seem to have lost my files from mouse 3, but I think you see how the principle works. So we've got 1 page for every iteration. And that's just because I have 1 page in my layout. Remember, if you have a more complicated layout, let's say you had, like that first layout I showed you, had 12 pages. In that case, you would have 12 slides for every iteration or 12 slides for every mouse. And for a 2-mouse experiment, you would then have a PowerPoint or a PDF with 24 slides or 24 pages. Okay, so hopefully you can see that this looks exactly like your layout. It's a 1-to-1 correlation. These are, of course, high resolution. You could expand them if you needed to make a poster and move them around. They're individual objects. And so here's the data from mouse 1, okay, and then here's that same data from mouse 2. Okay, so the nice thing is, of course, you can reuse this layout over and over again once it's built as a template, and that avoids having to recreate the wheel every time you repeat an experiment or repeat an analysis. Okay, so we're just about coming up on an hour, which means that probably time to wrap things up. But, you know, thank you so much for joining us. If you have any remaining questions while I'm wrapping things up, just enter those into the questions and answer. I'll stick around online for a few minutes and try to answer anything verbally, or my colleague Sean Burke will answer them through the chat window. But just to summarize, hopefully I've shown you today that FCS Express 6 has a user-friendly interface that facilitates the building of your layout, whether that's a simple layout like we've built together today, or a much more complex layout like the one I showed you at the beginning with 12 pages and 6 tubes per patient. I've shown you that panels is a very handy feature for analyzing a multi-tube experiment because it allows you to adjust the logic of your batch so that you're looking at the required number of tubes side by side per iteration. I've also shown you that the default statistics tables, you can get those by right-clicking on a plot, and that's handy for summarizing the results from a given plot. But you can also use spreadsheets to create custom-defined statistics like that ratio we made, or any algebraic or any sort of computational formula you want to make that you could make in Excel. You can use spreadsheets to do. And text tables are nicely formatted tables that will summarize the results from various plots and even spreadsheets on your layout. And we've also briefly summarized our results in a batch process to Excel and PowerPoint. We do have a full webinar on batch processing as well as a short 3-minute video on our website about batch processing. So I didn't go into a huge amount of detail about it, but if you want to know more, just please check one of those out. And if you have any other questions, like I said, I'm sticking around online and I see a few questions popping up, so I'll try to answer those in a moment. But if it's more in depth or something comes up on your own when you're trying out the demo or using your purchase license, write to us at support@denovosoftware.com. We love hearing from customers. We typically will get back to you within an hour or two, but definitely within 24 hours you'll hear a response from us. And go to fcsexpress.com for your free 30-day trial. Let me show you where that is as well. If you just come to our website and click on download FCS Express demo, you can download that 30-day demo. Okay, we definitely encourage you to do that. Even if you already have an older version of FCS Express, I've shown you a few new features today that are only available in FCS Express 6, in addition to the greatly enhanced speed and power of FCS Express 6. We really encourage you to try that out. So thanks so much. For those of you who are sticking around, I'm going to try to get to your questions now. For those of you who have to leave, thank you very much for attending, and we hope to see you at another webinar soon.